Why was everyone laughing? Maybe because they didn't know who she really was. Maybe because it was easier to mock what they didn't understand. Camp Pendleton, 700 hours. The coastal fog still clung to the firing range, wrapping the morning in a pale gray hush. The air smelled of salt, gun oil, and arrogance, the kind that gathers when 30 Marines think they've seen everything. And then she arrived. Rachel Mitchell, 28, brown hair pulled into a low knot, plain gray t-shirt, faded combat pants still marked with old mud stains. And in her hands, a rifle painted an unmissable shocking pink. The laughter started before she even reached the firing line. "Is that a Hello Kitty toy?" one Marine shouted. Another chimed in, "What's next, glitter grenades?" Even the seagulls seemed to mock her as they circled overhead. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't fire back with words. She just set the rifle down gently on the table, as though she were laying down something sacred. A tall man stepped forward, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, 6'4" of muscle, tattoos, and the swagger of someone who'd earned it. He folded his arms across his chest, blocking her path. "You seriously bringing that cotton candy piece of garbage to a Marine range?" he asked. "What's next? Unicorn stickers?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cameras came out. Live streams started. The woman with the pink rifle had officially become the morning's entertainment. But Rodriguez didn't notice her hands, the way they trembled, not from fear, but from something else. A rhythm, a subtle 4.7-second cycle between shakes. Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan noticed, though. He'd seen that tremor before. Combat tremor, nerve damage from too many near-death moments. He'd seen hands like that once in Afghanistan, hands that had saved his entire unit in a sandstorm when everything seemed lost. Rachel said nothing, just looked downrange, 6,000 meters away, where the targets shimmered faintly through the fog. Impossible distance. But her eyes didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Yo, Madison," someone called out. A blonde Marine, phone already live streaming, turned her camera toward Rachel. Madison Brooks, the base's unofficial influencer, known as Marine Barbie online. "Family," she said into her phone, smirking. "You're about to see what happens when civilians play soldier. This woman just showed up with a pink rifle to a Marine qualification shoot." Laughter again, louder now. Rodriguez gestured toward the table. "Pack it up, sweetheart," he said. "This range is for real Marines." But Rachel's voice, when it finally came, was calm. Soft, almost too soft to hear, but edged with something that made even Rodriguez's smirk falter. "I'll need about 15 minutes to set up," she said. No emotion, no defense, just quiet certainty. The crowd roared again, misreading silence for surrender. Madison's live stream viewers surged past 2,000. Tyler Webb, the youngest Marine there, kicked sand toward her boots just for fun, grinning as it scattered across her face. She didn't react, didn't blink, just wiped the dust away and kept working. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Combat breathing, controlled, measured. Sullivan's stomach tightened. "Who are you?" Her gear came from a battered 2008 Honda Civic, a car that looked as tired and unremarkable as she did. Dents, scratches, one headlight taped over. Every mark told a story. Every piece of equipment she unpacked was deliberate, careful. And then there was the rifle itself. Up close, the pink wasn't simple spray paint. Beneath it, Rodriguez's weapons expert Derek Miller noticed something strange. The upper receiver looked wrong, not standard issue, custom machined, expensive, purposeful. Before he could speak, Tyler shouted, $20 says she drops it before the first shot." Bills exchanged hands. Phones pointed. Rachel kept working. Her movements had rhythm, precision hidden beneath tremor. Each part clicked into place, bolt assembly, optics, bipod calibration. When she slid the scope into position, sunlight hit the lenses for a second, revealing faint flickers of data, augmented reality overlays, tech few civilians had ever seen. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, filled not with doodles or notes but complex formulas. Ballistic curves, wind patterns, atmospheric lensing. It looked more like physics than shooting. Rodriguez barked out, "You got 2 minutes to pack your toys, RS rifle, and walk off my range." Rachel didn't look up, didn't slow down, only brushed a finger over the dog tags tucked beneath her shirt, the letters worn, almost illegible, a silent memory, a name. Then her brown eyes lifted to meet his. 6,000 meters, she said. The laughter that followed could have shaken mountains. Even the lieutenant, overseeing the range, chuckled. "Lady," Rodriguez said, wiping tears of laughter from his face, "the world record is 3,500 meters by a Canadian sniper. You think you're going to double that with a pink rifle?" Her answer was one word. "Yes." Phones shook in laughter. Madison's viewers hit 5,000. Comments scrolled faster than anyone could read. But Sullivan's eyes narrowed. Her posture, her breathing, her packing, he knew that stance, knew that silence. It wasn't arrogance, it was calculation. And something else, something dangerous, was beginning to stir beneath the surface of mockery. Staff Sergeant Miller stepped closer, eyes fixed on the rifle. "Those modifications," he murmured, "that's not civilian tech. That upper receiver's custom, barrel harmonics, maybe even integrated stabilizers." "Who cares?" Tyler scoffed. "It's pink, that's all we need to know." "Deal," Rodriguez said suddenly, holding out his hand. "You hit a target at 1,000 meters, you stay. You miss, you're done. You pack up and never come back." Rachel didn't take his hand right away. Just studied it, the thick fingers, the cocky grin. Then she said softly, 6,000. Silence. Then another explosion of laughter. 6,000, you're out of your mind. Lady, physics doesn't even work that far. Elena Vasquez, a young lieutenant nearby, frowned as she studied the rifle. "Sir," she whispered to Miller, "those aren't cosmetic. Those are modular data ports. That weapon's integrated with something." Miller nodded slightly. "DARPA-level something." Rachel finally reached out, shook Rodriguez's hand. Her grip was firm despite the tremor. "Deal." The Marines whooped. Madison's camera zoomed in. "Okay, family, you're witnessing history, the biggest fail in Marine Corps history." But something strange began happening. The laughter grew thinner. Forced. Because Rachel didn't look like someone about to humiliate herself. She looked ready. Sullivan leaned toward Colonel Hawkins, who'd arrived quietly behind the crowd. "That woman's using Phantom Protocol," he whispered. The colonel's eyes hardened. "Impossible. Phantom was classified beyond top secret. Only 12 shooters ever learned it." "I'm telling you what I'm seeing," Sullivan murmured. "Breathing control, micro adjustments, 4.7-second intervals. That's Phantom timing." The colonel looked again at the trembling woman, setting up her pink rifle. And for the first time that morning, the mockery began to die out. 10 minutes, Rodriguez called. Princess gets 10 to make her impossible shot. Rachel's lips twitched, almost a smile. She knelt, careful with her knees, every motion efficient. She sipped from what looked like a water bottle but wasn't. A custom electrolyte formula designed for extreme neural focus. Sullivan's breath caught. "Neural stabilizer mix. That's SEAL team-grade tech. Who the hell is she?" Rachel didn't answer, didn't even seem to hear the crowd anymore. Only the range, the wind, the rhythm of her own hands. 4.7 seconds. Pause. 4.7 seconds. The tremor had become a metronome, a tool, not a weakness. Somewhere deep inside, a voice from her past whispered, "Steady, Ray. The tremor isn't your enemy, it's your timing." She exhaled. Fog thinned, wind steadied. 1,000 small conditions aligning by chance, or by something else. Rodriguez called again, 5 minutes, final chance to back out Barbie. Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm, clear the backblast area. Laughter again, nervous, uncertain. Backblast, that's a rifle, not a rocket, lady. But Sullivan had already started moving Marines back. He didn't know why, he just knew that tone, that calm authority that comes from someone who's been there. Rodriguez frowned, uneasy now. 10 seconds. Rachel adjusted her scope, her tremor perfectly rhythmic, every movement deliberate. 5. She found the half-second between tremors, the eye of stillness in a storm. 4. She exhaled. 3. The world narrowed to 6,000 meters away. 2. Her finger touched the trigger, gentle as a heartbeat. 1. The shot broke the morning. It wasn't a bang. It was a sound deeper, a resonant hum that seemed to vibrate the air itself. The rifle barely moved. The recoil that should have slammed her backward just didn't. The bullet tore through the fog. 8.7 seconds of silence followed, a silence that stretched into eternity. When the impact came, even the seagulls went quiet. 5 steel plates, each designed to stop .50 cal rounds, stood at the far end of the range. Each one now had a perfect hole through its center. The laughter died. No one spoke. No one breathed. Only the faint echo of a single impossible shot hanging in the air. Rachel didn't celebrate, didn't smile. She simply set the rifle's safety, stood up, and whispered something that only Sullivan caught. "Rob, you were right." The crowd, the fog, the morning, everything stood frozen around her. The woman with shaking hands. The pink rifle. The silence that swallowed the range whole. And somewhere deep in that stillness, a ghost stirred, one that had been buried years ago in Kandahar. Because Rachel Mitchell wasn't supposed to exist. She was supposed to be dead. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. What happens after silence? Sometimes, the truth echoes louder than the shot that caused it. For nearly 10 seconds, no one moved. The vapor trail still hung faintly in the air like a ghost's fingerprint, stretching across the sky, straight and unwavering. Then a phone dropped. Tyler Webb. It hit the concrete with a clatter that sounded like thunder in the stunned quiet. That single noise broke the spell. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief, confusion, fear. Marines looked at each other, at Rachel, at the distant targets that had no right to be pierced like that. The steel plates were rated to stop anything short of a tank round, and yet they stood there, neat holes punched clean through. 6,000 meters. A world record, shattered by a woman whose hands shook. Rodriguez was the first to speak, though his voice cracked. That's not possible. The math doesn't even." He stopped himself, realizing how ridiculous it sounded to argue with physics after watching it die in front of him. Sullivan stepped forward slowly. His eyes weren't mocking, they were searching. "Who the hell are you?" he asked softly. Rachel said nothing. She just bent down, calm, steady, picking up the single brass casing from the ground. She held it between her fingers for a heartbeat, long enough for sunlight to glint off the engraved code on its side. DARPA Exp 007. Derek Miller saw it and went pale. That's experimental military grade," he whispered. "Not even in production yet." "Experimental?" Tyler asked, still trying to laugh but unable to. "What does that mean?" "It means," Miller said slowly, "we just witnessed something that shouldn't exist." Rachel slipped the casing into her pocket, her movements deliberate. The tremor in her hands continued its 4.7-second rhythm. Nothing about her had changed, except now everyone was looking at her differently. The pink rifle no longer looked ridiculous. It looked dangerous. Madison Brooks, still holding her phone, lowered it for the first time that morning. Her live stream chat was exploding, tens of thousands watching, commenting, arguing if what they saw was real. But Madison wasn't looking at her screen anymore. She was staring at Rachel. Rodriguez tried to find his voice again, but the confidence was gone. You hacked it, right? Some kind of trick. Remote detonation, hidden target. Rachel didn't respond. She only adjusted the sling on her rifle case. Then Sullivan saw it, a flicker beneath her shirt as she moved. A mark. A tattoo. At first he thought it was just another service emblem. Then his breath caught. No, it couldn't be. He'd seen that symbol once before, on a file he wasn't supposed to see. A phoenix entwined with a number, 7. Colonel, he whispered to Hawkins, who had stepped up beside him, eyes fixed on the pink rifle. You need to look at her back. Hawkins frowned. Why? She's marked Phantom 7. The colonel froze. That's impossible, she said. Her voice was too calm, too controlled. Phantom 7 died in Kandahar, the whole team. Then explain that shot, Sullivan said quietly. Because that's Phantom protocol. No one outside that unit could do it. The word spread like a spark in dry grass. Phantom 7. A ghost unit, classified beyond top secret. Operators that even most generals never knew existed. Officially wiped out in an ambush 5 years ago. The kind of story that got buried under layers of, for national security. And yet one of them was standing right here, shaking, alive, and holding a pink rifle. The sound came before anyone could speak again, low, distant, rhythmic. Helicopters. 3 of them approaching fast. Every head turned toward the horizon. The fog had lifted now, the Pacific glittering beyond the base. Against the sunlight, 3 black shapes moved in formation, too small for transports, too fast for training birds. Rodriguez frowned. That's not base air traffic. We don't have any birds scheduled this morning. Rachel looked up. Her eyes changed. The calm vanished, replaced by something sharper, recognition. She knew that sound. She knew exactly what was coming. Everyone inside, she said firmly. Now. Nobody moved. Excuse me, Rodriguez asked, still trying to regain authority. Since when do civilians give? Now, Rachel repeated louder. Her voice cut through the morning like a command she'd given 1,000 times before. Inside the range building. Move. Sullivan was already moving. You heard her. Go. Years of combat instinct took over. He didn't need to understand. He just felt it. Those weren't friendly helicopters. The Marines hesitated for only a second before obeying. They gathered weapons, gear, still half in shock, still trying to process what they'd seen. But the edge in Rachel's voice left no room for argument. Rodriguez stayed frozen, staring at her. Who are you? He demanded. Really? Rachel met his eyes. For the first time that day, something broke in her expression, a crack in the mask. Tiredness, pain, grief that went too deep for words. Someone who should have stayed hidden, she said quietly. Someone they weren't supposed to find. The sound of rotors grew louder. Closer. 3 black helicopters, unmarked, slicing through the coastal haze like predators. Rodriguez's radio crackled with static, then died. All base frequencies went dark. EMP interference, Miller muttered. They're jamming comms. EMP pulse localized to this grid, Rachel said automatically. Her voice was different now, clipped, tactical, a soldier's cadence. They'll hit us fast. Small teams, 12 men per bird minimum. Rodriguez blinked. You can't know that. I do, Rachel said, because I trained them. The words hit harder than any explosion. Even Hawkins, who'd seen her share of combat nightmares, felt her stomach turn cold. Shadow Division, Rachel continued. CIA wet work. No names, no numbers, no jurisdiction. When they show up, they're not here to talk. Sullivan's jaw clenched. They're here for you. Rachel nodded once, and now for anyone who saw me. The building lights flickered, then died. A red glow bathed the room as emergency lighting snapped on. The Marines moved instinctively, securing windows, checking exits, posting guards. The training that lived in their bones took over, even as their minds screamed that this wasn't real. Derek Miller crouched near a window, watching the dark shapes land beyond the range perimeter. 3 birds confirmed. I count 24 hostiles, full Black Ops kit. Jesus, Tyler muttered. They're armed like ghosts. Because they are, Sullivan said. Shadow Division doesn't exist on paper. If they're here, someone about to get erased. Rachel was already unpacking her rifle. Piece by piece, smooth and precise. Her hands still trembled, but she worked between the tremors, the rhythm now a guide, not a flaw. Her expression had gone cold, detached, the look of someone who'd been here before. She reached into her gear bag and pulled out what looked like a small first aid kit. But inside was something else entirely. An old-looking transmitter humming with quiet energy. She connected a wire, flipped a hidden switch and spoke into it. "This is Pink Death," she said calmly. "Fix, they found me. Camp Pendleton, Range 7. 3 birds inbound, full teams. I'm not running again." Static, then a faint voice replied, distorted, distant. "Copy that, Pink Death. Hold the line." Rodriguez turned to Hawkins, voice shaking. "Colonel, this is insane. We've got Marines, sidearms, and 1 rogue sniper against 24 elite assassins," Rachel finished. "And if we don't act fast, none of us walk out." The first explosion cut her off. A breach charge on the north door. The shockwave rattled the walls, dust raining down from the ceiling. "Positions," Rodriguez shouted, instincts finally taking over. 30 Marines dropped behind cover, drawing sidearms, scavenging rifles, using tables for barricades. Rachel moved with them, low, controlled, efficient. She pulled 7 rounds from her pack, each one marked with red tips and warning symbols in unknown language. "These will disrupt their optics," she said quickly. "Electromagnetic interference. Stay clear of my line of fire." "Wait," Miller started. "Those rounds aren't." The second breach detonated, and all hell broke loose. Shadow Division operators poured in, black armor glinting in the red light. No insignia, no words, just methodical, silent movement, the kind that comes from killers who have erased their humanity long ago. Rachel's pink rifle roared. Each shot a pulse of thunder and light. Her tremor vanished mid-trigger pull, the 4.7-second rhythm turning into a deadly tempo. 1, 2, 3, every round hit its mark. Helmets cracked, optics shorted, gear sparked. "Contact left," Sullivan yelled. Rodriguez pivoted, returning fire with his pistol. The Marines held their ground, outnumbered but not outmatched. Rachel moved like she was conducting a symphony, calling targets, covering reloads, coordinating angles with wordless precision. Every time her rifle sang, another operator fell. Her weakness had become her timing, a metronome of death. "Flashbang," Miller warned. Rachel snapped a shot midair, hitting the grenade before it could detonate. The blast went off harmlessly above them. "How did you?" "Practice," she said, already tracking the next target. For 6 endless minutes, the firefight raged. Bullets slammed into concrete. Sparks sprayed off steel. The red emergency lights flickered like a heartbeat, syncing with the rhythm of her shots. When the smoke cleared, silence fell again, broken only by the sound of shallow breathing and the faint hum of dying electronics. 14 Shadow Division operatives lay on the ground. The rest had retreated, dragging their wounded toward the waiting helicopters. Rachel lowered her rifle. The tremor returned, worse now, unmasked by adrenaline. She slumped against the wall, exhaling slowly. Rodriguez stared at her, this trembling woman who just saved 30 Marines. "I owe you an apology," he said hoarsely. Rachel gave a small, exhausted smile. "You already paid it, you fought." Sullivan knelt beside her, checking her hands, the skin raw, trembling violently. "Nerve damage from torture?" he asked quietly. She nodded. 72 hours, they wanted coordinates, I didn't give them up. Hawkins swallowed hard. "Who betrayed you?" Rachel's eyes met hers, dark and steady. "Marcus Bishop," she said. "CIA handler, sold out my team. Phantom 7 died so he could live rich." Outside, the sound of Marine reinforcements grew louder, armored vehicles, shouting voices, the rush of boots. But inside, the 30 Marines who'd laughed at her just hours earlier stood in silent awe. A woman with shaking hands and a pink rifle had done the impossible twice in one morning, first with a shot, then with a stand. And somewhere between those two impossibilities, respect was reborn. She wasn't just a civilian anymore. She wasn't even just a sniper. She was something the Marines understood better than anyone else. A warrior who refused to leave anyone behind. As base security stormed the range, Rodriguez looked at her and said quietly, "You just declared war on the wrong people." Rachel glanced toward the shattered doors, the smoke drifting out into the daylight. Her voice was calm again, almost soft. "No," she said, "they declared war on the truth." And for the first time since Kandahar, she wasn't alone in that fight. What do you do after surviving the impossible? After laughter turns to silence, and silence turns to fear. The air inside Range 7 was thick with smoke and disbelief. Shell casings glinted on the floor like scattered memories. The red emergency lights still pulsed, steady as a wounded heartbeat. Marines moved in controlled chaos, checking wounded, securing weapons, sweeping corners that no longer held enemies. Outside, sirens wailed. Base security, finally responding, stormed through the perimeter. But inside, no one moved toward the trembling woman leaning against the wall with the pink rifle across her lap. Rachel Mitchell exhaled, long and slow. Her hands shook harder now that the fight was over. Pain returned where adrenaline had kept it away, a deep, burning ache crawling from her wrists to her elbows. She ignored it. Rodriguez knelt beside her. Up close she looked smaller, thinner, human in a way the myth could never be. "Hey," he said quietly, voice rough from smoke, "you still with us?" She nodded once, 7 rounds left. He blinked, not understanding. 7 rounds left, she repeated. Rob would be proud, his design worked. "Rob?" Elena Vasquez asked, crouching nearby with gauze in her hand. "Robert Mitchell," Rachel said softly. "My teammate, my husband." Her voice faltered, then steadied. "He built this rifle. The color was his joke. Said if I was going to be the only woman in Phantom, I might as well stand out." The pink rifle, a memorial disguised as mockery. Rodriguez's chest tightened. All morning he'd laughed at the color. Now it felt like guilt made visible. Across the room, Sullivan spoke quietly to Colonel Hawkins. "Ma'am, the surviving hostiles are retreating to the birds. No insignia, no ID, they're CIA shadow ops. I'd bet my pension." Hawkins nodded grimly. "And now every camera on this base has footage. This isn't going to stay quiet." Outside, rotor blades faded into the distance. For the first time, the Marines of Range 7 could breathe. They'd faced death in black uniforms and somehow lived. Derek Miller stepped forward, holding the empty casing Rachel had saved. "Colonel, you need to see this. It's DARPA Series 7 ammunition, propellants classified, I only know it from rumor, and her rifle," he hesitated, awed again. "It's using electromagnetic rail assist, miniaturized, that's supposed to be impossible." He looked at Rachel. How did he even build this?" Rachel's eyes softened. "Rob called it lightning glass. recoil dampening through magnetic counterforce. It spreads the energy instead of fighting it. Her voice dropped. He died testing it, the blast took him. I finished what he started. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Rodriguez exhaled. We mocked you for that color. Turns out it's a gravestone. Rachel gave a faint, weary smile. He said pink was harder to lose in the desert. Turns out he was right. Boots thundered outside, armored Marines, base police, medics. Colonel Hawkins straightened as the door burst open, and a woman in a two-star uniform strode in. General Patricia Morrison, stern, composed, radiating authority. Her gaze swept the room, the wounded, the wreckage, the unmarked bodies. And then it found Rachel. Colonel Hawkins, Morrison said evenly, explain. Hawkins inhaled. Ma'am, this is Staff Sergeant Rachel Mitchell, formerly Phantom Team 7. She just helped us repel an illegal CIA operation on Marine soil. The general's brows lifted a fraction. Phantom 7, they're dead. Reports were exaggerated, Rachel said, forcing herself upright. Despite the shaking, she stood at attention. Morrison studied her in silence. Then slowly, she returned the salute. Welcome home, Sergeant. Rachel's composure broke. Tears welled, but she held her salute until the general lowered hers. 5 years of running, hiding, being hunted, and someone had finally said welcome home. Sullivan stepped closer. Ma'am, we've got wounded Marines, 14 KIA hostiles, and evidence of Black Ops interference. We need containment. No, Morrison said firmly. We need transparency. This is going straight to the Pentagon. Rachel shook her head. General, if you bury this, they'll win. They thrive on silence. Morrison met her eyes. You have evidence. I have everything, data, transfers, orders signed by Marcus Bishop. He sold us out in Kandahar. The room chilled. Even hardened soldiers felt the weight of the name. Bishop, the ghost handler, long rumored to have vanished with classified intel. He's the reason Phantom 7 died, Rachel continued. He cashed in our lives for politics and money. I've been running ever since. Vasquez whispered, then this today they came to erase you. Rachel nodded, and anyone who saw me alive. General Morrison's jaw tightened, not on my base. Outside, armored transports screeched to a stop. Reinforcements poured in. The wounded were carried out. Paramedics tended to burns, shrapnel, and the rare, invisible injuries of disbelief. Rodriguez watched Rachel, still standing, refusing a medic's help. Her gray shirt was torn at the sleeve, streaked with soot and blood. The tremor hadn't stopped once, yet she looked unbroken. He approached quietly. I owe you that tattoo. Rachel frowned, confused. I said I'd tattoo Barbie on my forehead if you hit that target. I think I'll pick different words. She actually smiled, a small, tired smile that felt like sunrise through smoke. Maybe something shorter, like respect. Medics passed, carrying stretchers. Tyler Webb sat against a wall, bandaged, his phone dark beside him. When Rachel walked by, he looked up. His voice was small. Ma'am, I'm sorry for the sand, for the jokes. She stopped. You were young, you learned. He nodded, shame written across his face. You saved my life. Rachel's gaze softened. Then make it worth something. Outside, the range looked like a war zone. Smoke curled upward into the pale sky. Marines and investigators moved through wreckage. Camera drones hovered, gathering evidence that would be dissected for months. Rachel sat on the hood of her dented Honda Civic, staring at the horizon. Sullivan joined her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He offered one. You ever going to tell us the whole story? He asked. Maybe, she said, if anyone actually wants to hear it. They will, Sullivan replied. After today, they'll want to hear everything. She took a sip, grimaced at the bitterness. Been a while since I had coffee that wasn't from a ration pack. You think Bishop will come after you again? Rachel looked out over the ocean. He doesn't need to, he already sent his best, and he failed. That means he'll try something smarter next time. Then we'd better be ready. She smiled faintly. We. Yeah, Sullivan leaned back against the car. You just fought for 30 Marines who mocked you. I think you earned a few allies. A gust of coastal wind carried the smell of sea salt and spent gunpowder. Rachel let it wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace, fragile, fleeting, but real. Inside the command post, General Morrison's voice echoed across secure channels. Notify NCIS, FBI, and DARPA liaison. We're classifying Range 7 as a federal scene. And get word to Washington, tell them Phantom 7 just came back from the dead. Hours passed in a blur of debriefs and cleanup. Bodies were cataloged, weapons secured, hard drives collected. Each step chipped away at disbelief, replacing chaos with procedure. When dusk came, the sky burned gold over the Pacific. Rachel stood on the range again, staring at the 5 steel plates far in the distance, each one with a whole dead center. A record etched in metal, proof that belief could bend reality if the heart behind it was strong enough. Madison approached quietly. The influencer mask was gone, no makeup, no phone. Can I talk to you? Rachel turned. You already are. Madison hesitated. I'm ashamed. I built a career on showing people's best sides, but when you showed up, I chose the easy content mockery. You made me see how ugly that is. Rachel shook her head. You saw what everyone saw, a woman with shaky hands and a pink rifle. The difference is what you do next. Madison's eyes glistened. What should I do? Tell the truth, Rachel said. Not the myth, the truth. Madison nodded slowly. I will. That promise would turn into something bigger than either of them could imagine. But for now, it was just words whispered into a cooling evening. Later that night in the temporary operations tent, Morrison gathered the key figures: Hawkins, Sullivan, Rodriguez, Miller, and Rachel. Maps spread across a table, files open. This goes deep, Morrison said. Shadow Division was operating without oversight. Bishop's fingerprints are everywhere, but if we move too soon, they'll erase the evidence. Rachel reached into her pack, pulled out a small encrypted drive. They can't erase this. I copied everything before going underground. Morrison accepted it, her expression unreadable. You realize what this means? Rachel nodded. They'll come for me again. Then you stay under Marine protection. You're one of us now. Rachel looked at the faces around her, people who had laughed at her, doubted her, feared her, and saw something she hadn't seen in years: trust. Sullivan broke the silence first. So what's next? Rachel looked down at her trembling hands. I stop running. We bring the truth into the light. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the faint hum of distant helicopters fading into night. A ghost of the morning, now retreating for good. When she opened them again, the world felt different. Still dangerous, still heavy with secrets, but no longer lonely. Outside, the wind carried the faint rhythm of waves hitting the shore, steady, repeating, relentless. Almost like her tremor. 4.7 seconds, pause, 4.7 seconds, pause. The cadence of survival. Sullivan watched her for a moment. You ever regret it coming here? Rachel smiled faintly. No, because today, for the first time in years, I wasn't just a ghost, I was a Marine. The camera would fade there in the film version, on her silhouette against the Pacific, the pink rifle resting beside her, the sky turning from gold to crimson. A moment suspended between past and future, guilt and grace. And somewhere deep in that silence between waves, a truth settled. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as a second chance to stand your ground. What happens when the truth refuses to stay buried? When a single shot shatters not just steel, but the walls built to hide betrayal. By dawn, Camp Pendleton was no longer just a base, it was a storm. Floodlights cut through the coastal mist, convoys rolled in. Reporters pressed against security fences. Every camera, every whisper, every rumor pointed to one woman with trembling hands and a pink rifle. Rachel Mitchell sat alone in a small debrief room, the walls sterile and white, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Her rifle, her lifeline, sat sealed in an evidence case on the table. She watched it through the glass as if it were alive. It felt strange not to have it near her, like a missing limb. The tremor in her hands was worse now, unanchored by focus. The door opened softly. General Morrison stepped in, followed by Colonel Hawkins and Jake Sullivan. Their faces were drawn, weary from a night that hadn't ended. "Sergeant," Morrison began, her tone a blend of authority and respect, "you should be in a hospital." Rachel shook her head. "I've been in worse places." "I don't doubt it," Morrison replied, "but you need to understand the scale of what's happening." She set down a folder, thick, marked classified material, level Omega. Footage from yesterday has gone viral, 25 million views and climbing. Every veterans forum, every military blog, they're calling you the pink ghost, the woman who broke physics. Rachel didn't flinch. "Let them call me what they want. I didn't do it for them." Hawkins leaned forward. "You did it to finish what your husband started." Rachel's eyes flickered. "I did it because I'm tired of running." Sullivan crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "The world thinks you're a legend, but legends don't get to rest. They get dissected, controlled, used. You know that." Rachel gave a faint, sad smile. "I used to be their weapon. I won't be again." For a long moment, none of them spoke. Outside, helicopters came and went, carrying debris, bodies, secrets. Finally, Morrison opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. A man in his 50s, clean-cut, expensive suit, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus Bishop." "Your handler," Morrison said, "now director of strategic operations at a private defense contractor. He's been laundering data and tech through shell companies. And thanks to the files you gave us, we can prove it." Rachel's gaze hardened. "Where is he?" "Washington," Morrison replied. "He's attending a security summit under full diplomatic protection, untouchable until we go public." Rachel leaned back, eyes distant. "Untouchable," she repeated quietly. "That's what he used to call us, the team, untouchable operators, and then he sold us for a paycheck." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and the tremor in her hands spiked. Sullivan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did what no one else could. You lived. You brought proof." Rachel stared at her reflection in the glass case, the faint outline of a woman she barely recognized. Living and surviving aren't the same thing. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush air. By noon, Range 7 looked like a crime scene married to a movie set. NCIS, FBI, and DARPA investigators swarmed the area. Evidence markers dotted the ground like gravestones. Marines gave statements, trying to make sense of the chaos, of the pink rifle, the impossible shot, the black helicopters. Madison Brooks stood beside a camera crew, her expression sober. She wasn't filming for clicks anymore. She was documenting history. "Yesterday, this was just a qualification range," she said quietly into the lens. "Now it's a question. How far will people go to silence the truth?" Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She owed Rachel that much. Tyler Webb, nearby, helped an NCIS agent bag recovered weapons. His energy was different now, subdued, thoughtful. Every so often, he looked toward the building where Rachel sat, as if checking that she was still real. Inside the temporary command tent, Derek Miller hunched over a table full of diagrams. He had disassembled Rachel's weapon under supervision, piece by piece, screw by screw. Each component had revealed something no engineer could explain. It's revolutionary, he murmured to Hawkins. The recoil absorption system uses magnetic pulse dampening. There's no way she or her husband built this in a garage. Maybe they didn't, Hawkins said. Maybe DARPA did and buried it when Phantom 7 was burned. Miller looked up. You think she stole it? No, Hawkins replied. I think she saved it. That evening the Pacific sky turned the same shade of pink as Rachel's rifle, soft, disarming, ironic. She stood outside under it, finally breathing air that didn't taste like cordite and fear. Her body ached, her nerves screamed. But she was alive. Rodriguez joined her, a bandage on his arm, his voice low. You know, I've seen combat on 3 continents, he said, but nothing like that. You didn't just shoot a target. You made everyone here question everything they thought they knew. Rachel didn't respond. She just watched the ocean. It's strange, she said finally. You can go years trying to stay invisible, and all it takes is one moment of truth to make you the most visible person in the world. Rodriguez nodded. Visibility's dangerous. So is silence, Rachel replied. I kept quiet once. It cost lives. He looked at her trembling hands. You're still shaking. It never stops, she said. But I stopped fighting it. It's not weakness anymore. It's a reminder. A reminder of what? That I'm still here. They stood in silence, listening to the waves. Behind them, soldiers worked late, packing up evidence and sealing the range. The pink rifle would soon be flown to a secure lab, but its story had already escaped containment. Later that night, Morrison called an emergency conference in the base auditorium. Rows of Marines, officers, and agents filled the seats, faces lit by cold blue light from the projection screen. On it, documents, photos, maps. Bishop's network laid bare. Shell companies, arms transfers, bribes, ghost operations signed under fake clearances. Morrison's voice echoed, firm and clear. Thanks to Sergeant Mitchell's evidence, we have confirmation that Phantom 7's ambush in Kandahar was orchestrated from within. Orders for extraction were delayed 6 hours by falsified command signatures. The unit's position was sold to insurgents. 11 operators died. Murmurs rippled through the room. Rachel stood near the back, shadows hiding most of her face. She lived this before in screams, in sand, in blood. Hearing it like a presentation felt unreal. Morrison continued. Mitchell escaped capture after being tortured for intelligence she refused to give. She has since remained off-grid, hunted by the same people who betrayed her. Someone from the press pool raised a hand. General, what happens to Bishop now? Morrison didn't hesitate. We expose him. No more black sites, no more secrets. The American people will hear this story. Rachel's head lifted slightly. You mean that? Morrison met her eyes. I do, but you'll need to stand beside me when we do it. Rachel hesitated. I've spent 5 years in the dark. You sure the light won't burn? Morrison's tone softened. Sometimes it has too. After the meeting, Rachel found herself back on the range, drawn to it like gravity. The night air was cool, the fog returning. She walked until she reached the firing line, the exact spot she'd stood the morning before. In the distance, new targets gleamed faintly under floodlights. 6,000 meters away, an impossible distance that no longer felt impossible. Her hands shook as she traced the memory of the rifle she didn't have. The ghosts of her teammates seemed to linger there, laughter, arguments, missions that had never made headlines. Rob, she whispered to the wind, I did it, they saw. The sea breeze answered in a hush that almost sounded like his voice. I knew you would. She closed her eyes. For the first time her shoulders eased. Footsteps crunched behind her. Sullivan approached, holding a thin file. Thought you might want to see this, he said. Inside were photos, Bishop at the summit, smiling for cameras. Tomorrow, Sullivan said, he faces a hearing. Morrison's taking this all the way to the Senate. Rachel nodded, but her expression was unreadable. Tomorrow. You don't sound convinced, he said carefully. Justice moves slow, she replied. Bishop doesn't. Sullivan studied her face. You thinking of going after him? Rachel's gaze remained on the ocean. If the system fails, I'll finish what Phantom started. He sighed. You can't keep carrying that weight. She looked at him, weary, resolute. It's not weight, Sullivan, it's duty. In another part of the base, Madison edited her footage into something raw and honest. No music, no flashy cuts, just the story of a woman everyone underestimated. Her voiceover trembled as she spoke. Sometimes we laugh because we're scared. Sometimes we mock what we don't understand. But courage doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it shakes, trembles, and still pulls the trigger. When she finished, she didn't upload it. Not yet. She sent it to Rachel instead with a message. You tell me when the world's ready. Rachel smiled when she saw it. Maybe the world would never be ready, but maybe that didn't matter anymore. The next morning, headlines exploded. Phantom 7, survivor exposes CIA treason. Pink rifle sniper shocks the Pentagon. 6,000 M shot that changed everything. The story spread faster than the agencies could contain it. For every analyst calling her a hero, there was another labeling her a liability. Politicians debated her sanity. Conspiracy forums turned her into myth. But none of that noise mattered. What mattered was that Bishop's name was out there. And for the first time in years, Rachel Mitchell wasn't running from the past, she was chasing it. As she stepped outside the barracks that morning, the sun broke over the ocean, the same horizon she'd faced through a rifle scope. Its light hit her trembling hands, and for once she didn't hide them. Sometimes the only way to silence ghosts is to let them speak. And somewhere in Washington, a man named Marcus Bishop began to realize that the woman he buried years ago was walking back into his world. Not as a victim, but as the storm. How do you tell the truth in a room built on silence? 3 days later, Rachel stood under the blinding white lights of Capitol Hill. The Senate Subcommittee on Defense Oversight, oak panels, polished brass, cameras everywhere. Rows of journalists leaned forward like wolves waiting for movement. In the center of it all, a single chair, a single microphone, and the woman who'd refused to die quietly. She wore her uniform, not the new issue one, but the faded one she'd kept hidden all these years, the one with sand still in the seams. Her trembling hands rested on the table, folded, steady enough for the moment. The hearing began with the gavel's echo, sharp, final. Sergeant Rachel Mitchell, the chairman's voice rang. You're under oath. Tell us in your own words what happened in Kandahar. The room fell silent. Rachel glanced up at the senators, the same men and women whose signatures had once authorized her existence, and later her erasure. She took a breath. My team was called Phantom 7, she began. 7 operatives. No records, no uniforms. We did the missions others couldn't. The kind no one would admit existed. In 2020, we were deployed to extract a compromised asset in Kandahar, but someone sold our coordinates. A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras clicked like distant gunfire. Rachel continued, voice calm but heavy. We were surrounded within minutes. The ambush was surgical. They knew our exact positions, call signs, and escape routes. It wasn't random, it was betrayal. She paused. The tremor in her hands returned, faint but visible. I lost 6 brothers that night. One of them was my husband, Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell. I watched him burn, buying me 12 seconds of cover, and those 12 seconds bought me 5 years of silence. The words hung in the air, raw and naked. You could feel the room breathe differently after that. Senator Doyle leaned forward, his tone cautious. Sergeant, are you claiming that a member of our intelligence community orchestrated the ambush? Rachel met his gaze. I'm not claiming, sir, I'm confirming. A ripple of whispers. The chairman called for order. Rachel reached into her folder and slid a small drive across the table. On this drive are the financial records, encrypted communication, and falsified orders signed by Director Marcus Bishop. He sold Phantom 7's location to a private security firm in exchange for kickbacks through shell contracts. That's not speculation. That's evidence. The chairman took the drive with gloved hands, handing it to a clerk. It will be verified. It already has, said a voice from the back of the chamber. Every head turned. General Morrison stepped forward, uniform immaculate, eyes sharp. My office confirmed the signatures this morning. The data is authentic. The room erupted, reporters shouting, flashes exploding, senators talking over one another. Rachel didn't move. She'd expected the noise. The noise was easy. What she hadn't expected was what came next. From the far corner of the room, a man stood calm, confident, smiling like he'd been waiting for this moment. Marcus Bishop. Flanked by aides and lawyers, he adjusted his tie and spoke before anyone could stop him. With all due respect, this is theater, he said smoothly. A rogue operative making accusations to cover up her own misconduct. Morrison stiffened. You weren't invited to speak, Bishop. He smiled thinly. When someone tries to assassinate your career, you show up to the funeral. Rachel's pulse quickened. The sound of his voice, too calm, too polished, brought it all back. The desert, the betrayal, the cold. She forced herself to stay still. Funny, she said quietly, you didn't show up to the others' funerals. Gasps echoed. Even the chairman looked momentarily shaken. Bishop's expression didn't falter. He leaned forward slightly, voice dripping with condescension. Sergeant, I understand grief. It distorts memory. You've been through unimaginable trauma. The human mind doesn't invent wire transfers, Rachel cut in. Laughter rippled through the press gallery. Bishop's jaw tightened. He tried to recover. You think I needed to betray you? I was your superior, Mitchell. You followed my orders. I followed the mission, Rachel said. You followed the money. That was the breaking point. The audience erupted again. The chairman's gavel thundered. Order, we will have order in this chamber. Rachel sat back, her pulse still pounding. She'd faced sniper fire, torture, death, but this was different. This was a war fought with words, with truths buried under titles and polished suits. Bishop leaned close to his lawyer, whispering. The cameras caught the exchange. When he spoke again, his tone was colder. You think you can ruin me with one file? You don't understand how this game works, Sergeant. The system protects its architects. Rachel looked him dead in the eyes. Then maybe it's time we build a new system. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Even the camera operators stopped moving for a moment. Outside, the world reacted in real time. Every network carried the hearing live. On social media, millions watched, soldiers, veterans, families of the fallen. The hashtag spread, Phantom 7, Pink Ghost, Truth in Uniform. Some called her a hero. Others called her a liar. But no one could ignore her. Madison Brooks watched from a crowded newsroom, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't edit this time, she didn't filter. She just streamed the raw feed, captioned simply. She's not shaking because she's weak. She's shaking because she still feels. When the hearing recessed, Rachel walked into the marble hallway outside. The cameras swarmed her like a wave, microphones, flashes, questions shouted over one another. Sergeant Mitchell, are you saying the CIA authorized murder? Do you regret going public? Are you afraid for your safety? She kept walking, eyes forward, voice steady. I'm not afraid of the truth, only of silence. Sullivan caught up to her as security pushed reporters back. You handled that like a pro, he said quietly. Rachel smirked faintly. Wasn't my first ambush. They shared a brief laugh, small, real, human. Then Sullivan's earpiece buzzed. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "Anonymous tip," he said grimly. "They've put a hit out on you. Contract team out of D.C." Rachel's jaw tightened. Shadow division again. No, worse, Bishop's cleaning house. For a moment the noise of the hallway faded. Rachel's mind went cold, clear. "They're going to hit before the evidence leaks," she said. "Tonight." Sullivan nodded. "Then we move first." Hours later, Washington glittered under nightfall, polished, proud, oblivious. But beneath its monuments, the war still moved in shadows. Rachel and Sullivan sat in a black SUV parked a block from Bishop's private residence, a fortress of glass and stone. Inside, a party glowed through tall windows. Politicians, executives, laughter that didn't reach the street. Rachel checked her watch. Her hands trembled slightly. She exhaled, let the tremor settle into rhythm. "You sure about this?" Sullivan asked. "I'm not here to kill him," she said. "I'm here to end this." She stepped out into the cold night, her boots crunching softly against the wet pavement. No rifle this time. No armor. Just a hidden recorder in her jacket and a courage she wasn't sure she still owned. Security stopped her at the gate. "I'm here to see Marcus Bishop," she said calmly. The guard frowned. "Name?" "Rachel Mitchell." The name hit like a code word. He hesitated long enough for Bishop himself to appear in the doorway, drink in hand, smirk in place. "Well," he said, stepping outside, "the ghost herself." Rachel's voice was steady. "You and I need to talk." He waved off the guards, let her through. Inside, the music dulled behind glass. Bishop poured himself another drink, motioned toward the balcony. "You should be thanking me, Rachel. You wouldn't exist without me." "I existed long before your orders," she replied, "and I'll exist after your empire burns." He chuckled. "Do you really think they'll believe you? You're a soldier with tremors and trauma. I'm a patriot with connections." "Then maybe," she said, pulling the recorder from her jacket, "they'll believe your own voice." She pressed play. His private call recordings, the same ones she'd extracted from the encrypted drive, spilled into the night air. Bishop's voice, cold and clear. "Phantom 7's a liability, sell them. We can recover the tech later." His drink froze halfway to his lips. Rachel's eyes met his. Game over. He tried to lunge for her, desperate, furious, but Sullivan appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn. "Don't," he warned. "It's over, Director." Bishop's shoulders sagged, the mask cracked. All his power, all his control, gone with a single recording. Rachel stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You taught me to kill, Marcus, but you never taught me how to stop. Lucky for you, I learned." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, trapped by his own words. The next morning, headlines screamed across the world. CIA Director arrested in Phantom 7 betrayal. Pink Ghost exposes the deep shadow. Rachel watched from a quiet motel room, the TV muted, her reflection flickering in the screen. The tremor in her hands was still there, softer now, like a heartbeat she'd finally made peace with. Sullivan sat nearby, reading the statement Morrison had released. "You did it," he said simply. Rachel shook her head. "No, we did." He smiled faintly. "You ever going back?" "To the Marines?" she asked. "No, my war's done." She looked out the window, sunlight spilling across the city she'd once believed in. It was beautiful, flawed, alive. Just like her. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, trembling, steady enough to be heard. And in that quiet morning light, Rachel Mitchell, the ghost, the sniper, the soldier who shook, finally set her rifle down and let the world see her as she truly was. Not a weapon. Not a myth. Just a woman who refused to stay silent. What happens when the war ends? But the noise does. 3 days after Bishop's arrest, Washington was still roaring. Every headline screamed his downfall. Every talk show dissected his motives. But Rachel Mitchell didn't care about any of it. She was gone before sunrise. No press, no ceremony, just a name quietly removed from protective custody and replaced with a new one. For the first time in years, she didn't feel hunted. Only hollow. The road stretched ahead, endless, quiet, unforgiving. She drove west, away from the marble halls, away from cameras, until the city became silence and the silence became peace. In the passenger seat sat a small wooden box, plain, unmarked, but sacred. Inside, the brass casing from the 6,000-meter shot. And Rob's dog tags. The tremor in her hands returned, soft and rhythmic against the steering wheel. She didn't fight it anymore. She let it move through her like breathing. Every few miles, she'd glance at the horizon, the line between land and sky, the same line she'd stared across through a scope for half her life. But now, she wasn't looking for targets. She was looking for closure. By late afternoon, she reached the desert. Kandahar had its ghosts, but so did California. The training range lay empty, wind slicing through abandoned buildings, flags half torn, sun bleeding across the sand. She parked the car at the edge of the dunes and stepped out, the air shimmering with heat. For a long time she just stood there, staring at nothing. This was where it had started, not the war but the wait. The first time she'd picked up a rifle and realized how easy it was to take something you could never give back. She walked until she found a small ridge overlooking the valley. The sand shifted beneath her boots, whispering like voices she used to know. The wind carried faint echoes, laughter, radio chatter, the memory of 7 shadows that never left her side. She knelt and placed the box in the dirt. Her fingers traced Rob's name on the tag, Robert Mitchell, Phantom 7. Then she closed her eyes. "I told you I'd make them see," she whispered. "They did, Rob, they finally did." The wind answered with silence, the kind that meant listening. She stayed there for hours, watching the sunset burn the desert gold. Each ray caught the edge of the brass casing, lighting it like a small fire, a final salute. Back in D.C., the world moved on quickly, as it always did. News cycles shifted, new scandals replaced old ones. But some stories refused to fade. Madison Brooks released her final documentary, The Pink Ghost, the soldier who shook the world. No dramatization, no narration. Just Rachel's story in her own words, told through moments of raw truth, trembling hands loading a rifle, a silent woman walking away from the wreckage, her voice saying softly, "I'm not afraid of the truth, only of silence." It went viral again. Not because it was sensational, but because it was real. Every soldier who'd ever been ignored, every woman who'd ever been doubted, every person who'd ever trembled and still stood tall, they saw themselves in her. Tyler Webb watched it from his barracks, head bowed. He'd printed a photo of Range 7, the moment before that 6,000-meter shot. Beneath it, he'd written 3 words. She was right. Derek Miller was reassigned to a research division, where he worked to adapt Rachel's rifle technology for medical purposes, prosthetics, stabilizers, neural feedback systems. He called it Project Lightning Glass. Every file bore a quiet dedication. For Rob and Rachel Mitchell, proof that precision begins in the heart. Even General Morrison wasn't untouched. She testified before Congress weeks later, demanding oversight for black ops units and whistleblower protection for operatives like Rachel. It wasn't popular, it wasn't clean. But it was right. And somewhere far from all of them, Rachel was finally learning how to breathe again. The desert night was colder than she remembered. She sat by a small fire near the ridge, her pink rifle beside her, now stripped of tech, its sleek components replaced with simple steel. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a memory. She cleaned it the old-fashioned way, slow, methodical, respectful. Each movement steady despite the tremor. The ritual calmed her more than any therapy ever could. When the fire burned low, she reached into her pack and pulled out a small, weathered journal. The cover was faded, the pages yellowed. Rob's handwriting filled most of it, mission notes, sketches, fragments of dreams he never got to live. On the last page, a line stood alone, written in bold black ink. "If I die before you, promise me one thing. Don't let them bury our truth." Her throat tightened. "I didn't," she whispered. "I kept it alive." She closed the journal gently, then tilted her head back to look at the stars. There were so many, endless, unblinking, eternal. She wondered if Rob was among them, or if souls like theirs stayed closer to the ground, tethered to the places they'd fought for. The fire cracked softly. Her rifle gleamed in the glow, its pink surface reflecting embers like constellations of its own. Sullivan's voice came over the radio she still carried, the one he'd insisted she keep. "Pink Ghost, you copy?" She smiled faintly at the old call sign. "Copy." "Just checking in," he said. "World's quieter without you in it." "Quiet's not bad," she replied. "Means someone else is standing watch." "Still shaking?" "Always," she said, "but I've stopped hiding it." He chuckled softly. "Good. Some of us needed to see that shaking doesn't mean breaking." The transmission crackled, then faded into static. Rachel sat in the glow of dying embers, alone but not lonely. She thought about the people who'd doubted her, the soldiers who'd followed her, the ghosts who'd never left. All of them part of the same story written in silence, finished in truth. She reached for the casing one last time, holding it between her fingers. It was warm from the fire. The engraving caught the light, DARPA Exp-007. The same number as her unit. The same number she'd carried on her skin. She smiled through the ache. "We're still here, 7. And for a moment, she swore she heard laughter in the wind, familiar, echoing, gentle. Rob's laugh. The kind that made her believe everything might be okay. Weeks turned into months. The world forgot, as it always does. But the mark Rachel left didn't fade. It rippled quietly, in every act of courage that didn't need applause. A young woman at basic training painted her rifle pink and told her instructor, "It's for the soldier who shook the world." A Marine Corps sniper team added 7 engraved lines on their helmets. And in Arlington, a new stone appeared among the rows of white, unmarked, except for 3 words. For those who spoke. No one knew who placed it there. But if you stood by it at dawn, when the wind was right, you could almost hear a distant echo, a single shot crossing 6,000 meters of air and 5 years of silence. One evening, Rachel drove up the coast, nowhere in particular, just chasing the sun. She stopped at a cliff overlooking the ocean, where the waves crashed endlessly below. Her hands trembled on the railing, but her heart was still. She whispered almost to herself, "Maybe it's time to stop running." A quiet moment passed, filled with sea breeze and salt. Then she took off her dog tags and hung them on the metal post beside her, the wind catching them like chimes. They swayed and sang softly in the sunset. "Goodbye, Rob," she murmured. "Not in grief. In peace." She turned away from the ocean, her silhouette fading into the amber light. Each step forward lighter than the one before. Because some wars don't end with peace treaties. They end when the heart finally stops fighting itself. And as night settled, her words from the hearing replayed in countless minds, in countless voices. "I'm not afraid of the truth, only of silence." It became more than a quote. It became a creed. And for every soldier, every survivor, every quiet soul who ever trembled in the dark, Rachel Mitchell's story became a reminder. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking through it anyway. What happens when a warrior finally puts her weapon down? But the world refuses to let her rest. 2 months had passed since Washington. The headlines had cooled. The world had moved on as it always does. But for Rachel Mitchell, peace was still something she didn't quite trust. She lived quietly now in a cabin near the edge of Big Sur, the kind of place where the ocean met the cliffs like two old friends who never needed to speak. Her days were simple: coffee before dawn, long walks along the coast, fixing things that didn't work and pretending she wasn't still broken. Every morning, she'd watch the sun rise over the Pacific, the same horizon she'd once stared across through a rifle scope. But now there was no target. Just light. Just quiet. Sometimes she'd feel the tremor in her hands and smile. It no longer reminded her of torture or fear. It reminded her she was still alive. On the wall above her small workbench hung her pink rifle, disassembled, cleaned, inert. A relic of another life. A piece of art now, not war. The world had called her the Pink Ghost, but to herself, she was just Rachel again. That was enough. Until the knock came. It was early evening, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. She opened the door to find a man in plain clothes standing there, posture crisp despite the casual jacket. He had the kind of eyes that had seen too much and remembered every detail. "Rachel Mitchell?" he asked. She gave him a measured look. "Depends who's asking." He smiled faintly. "Name's Keller, Major Keller, Defense Intelligence." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold introduction for a man on my porch. I figured honesty might keep me from getting shot." "Good start," she said dryly. "Now try telling me why you're here." Keller hesitated, then handed her a folder, plain, stamped classified/debrief only. Inside were satellite images, intercepted transmissions, names she didn't recognize and one she did. Project Spectre. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't heard that codename in years. "They're rebuilding it," Keller said quietly. "Different division, same foundation, unaccountable operations, new funding, new leadership." Rachel's jaw clenched. "I thought we killed that program with Bishop." "So did we," Keller said. "But his people weren't all arrested. Some slipped the net, and they've been recruiting quietly globally. Contractors, hackers, field units, the kind of ghosts who don't show up on paper." Rachel closed the folder. "Why tell me?" "Because someone out there is using your name." She frowned. "My name?" Keller nodded. "They call her Mitchell too, claims to be a former Phantom, uses your tactics, your signature, pink rifle and all." "That's impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but someone's making the world believe it's you." She walked to the window, staring at the rolling fog outside. After everything, after the hearings, the truth, the peace she'd clawed out of silence, the ghosts were back. New faces wearing her scars. Keller spoke softly. "We're putting together a new task force. Small, autonomous, designed to expose rogue black ops before they happen. We need someone who's seen both sides of the curtain." "Let me guess," Rachel said. "You want me to train them?" He nodded. "You don't have to fight again. Just teach them how to see what others miss." Rachel turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Do you know what happens to people who see too much, Keller?" He paused. "They stop sleeping. They stop belonging," she said. For a long time, neither spoke. The ocean roared beyond the cliffs, endless and steady. Finally, Keller said quietly, "You stopped running once. Maybe it's time you stopped hiding too." He left the folder on the table and walked out, his footsteps fading into the sound of surf. Rachel stood there for a long moment, staring at it, the seal, the weight, the choice. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like whispers of her past. Phantom 7. Kandahar. Bishop. Rob. She thought she'd buried it all, but maybe you don't bury ghosts. Maybe you just learn to walk beside them. That night she couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch, the air cool, the sea mist thick. Her breath came out in small clouds, like smoke from a fatting war. She looked at her hands. The tremor was still there, faint, gentle, constant. The rhythm that had once betrayed her now felt like heartbeat and compass all at once. She whispered to the dark, "If I say yes, Rob, am I breaking my promise?" The answer was silence, but not empty. The kind of silence that listens. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, I thought so too." Morning came quietly, wrapped in fog. Rachel brewed coffee, packed a small rucksack, and sat at her desk one last time. She opened Rob's old journal again, the page with his last message. "Don't let them bury our truth." She wrote beneath it, her handwriting steady despite the tremor. "I won't, but this time I'll teach others how to keep it alive." Then she closed the book and placed it beside the disassembled rifle. Piece by piece, she reassembled it not as a weapon but as something symbolic. Each motion slow, reverent. Barrel, scope, stock, chamber. By the time she was done, the sun had broken through the fog. The pink metal gleamed softly, almost golden. She slung it over her shoulder and stepped outside. For the first time in years, the weight didn't feel heavy. It felt right. 3 weeks later, a black unmarked SUV pulled up at a training compound deep in the Nevada desert. Inside the gate, 10 recruits waited, men and women from different backgrounds, different scars, all wearing the same expression of uncertainty. Keller stood at the center, clipboard in hand. When he saw Rachel step out of the SUV, he smiled. "Mitchell," he said, "wasn't sure you'd come." She shrugged lightly. "Neither was I." The recruits watched as she approached. Some whispered, some stood straighter. All of them had seen her story, the impossible shot, the trial, the truth. They didn't know what to expect. What they got was a woman who looked calm, weathered, alive, not larger than life, but exactly life-sized. Rachel stopped in front of them. "You all know why you're here," she said. "You've seen what the shadows can do. Your job isn't to destroy them, it's to bring them into the light." Her voice was steady, her tremor barely visible. "But before you learn how to shoot, or infiltrate, or decode, you're going to learn something more important." A pause. The sound of silence. The recruits glanced at each other, confused. Rachel smiled faintly. "It's what fills the space between choices. It's what tells you when not to pull the trigger. If you can't hear it, you'll never last." She stepped forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Every time you touch a weapon, remember this. You're holding someone's ending or their beginning. Don't confuse the two." The wind picked up, carrying dust and memory. Rachel lifted the pink rifle, sighted toward the horizon, then lowered it again. "Lesson 1, she said softly. "Never let anyone define you by the color of your weapon or the weight of your past." A few of them smiled. One woman, young, nervous, maybe 20, raised her hand. "Ma'am, what should we call you?" Rachel thought for a moment, then said simply, "Call me Mitchell, or don't call me at all, just listen." Weeks passed. Under her guidance, the recruits transformed, not into killers but into thinkers. Rachel taught them patience, stillness, empathy. How to see without judging, how to act without ego. And most importantly, how to survive without losing themselves. At night, when the training grounds fell silent, she'd walk to the edge of the desert and look at the stars. They looked the same as they had over Kandahar, except now they didn't hurt to look at. Sometimes Keller would join her. "You could stay here," he'd say, "lead the program permanently." She'd shake her head. "No, my place is to pass through, teach, then leave before they start seeing me as a myth." He nodded, understanding. You ever think about settling down? She smiled faintly. I did once, but the stars keep moving. One evening, as training wrapped for the week, Rachel found a small envelope on her bunk. No sender, just a symbol drawn in black ink, a phoenix entwined with the number 7. Her pulse slowed. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, coordinates, a date, and a message. We're proud of you, see you soon. Her eyes softened. She folded it neatly, slipping it into her pocket. Maybe the ghosts weren't gone after all. Maybe they never were. As she looked up at the dark horizon, she whispered, "Still watching me, aren't you?" The wind answered with a faint whisper, almost a laugh. That night, Rachel stood at the firing line one last time, her recruits behind her, watching. She chambered a single round, just one. The pink rifle gleamed under the moonlight. 6,000 meters, Keller said softly. You gonna try again? Rachel smiled, shaking her head. No need, I already hit what I was aiming for. She aimed at the horizon anyway, breathing slowly, the tremor steady and rhythmic, not weakness but grace. Then she fired. The sound echoed across the desert, soft and sure. The round disappeared into the night, somewhere between earth and sky. The recruit stared in silence. Rachel lowered the rifle, whispering more to herself than anyone else. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And as the echo faded into the quiet, you could almost hear another voice layered behind hers, Rob's, soft, proud, eternal. You did good, pink ghost. She smiled at the darkness. Not a ghost anymore, she said, just a survivor. The night held her words like a promise. How do you say goodbye to a life that never really let you live? You don't. You just fade like a shadow at dawn. A year had passed since the desert training ground, since Rachel had taken her final shot. The world had changed again, a little louder, a little wiser, maybe a little braver. And Rachel Mitchell had vanished. No one knew when she left. One morning her bunk was empty, her gear gone, her rifle case missing from the rack. But she hadn't run away. There was no panic in her absence, only silence. The kind that felt deliberate. Major Keller found a letter on her desk. No seal, no rank, just a few words written in a steady, trembling hand. You can't teach freedom from fear. You can only show what it looks like. Keep showing them. RM. He read it twice, then folded it carefully into his jacket pocket. He didn't tell the recruits. He didn't have to. They felt her absence the way you feel the missing beat in a song you've memorized. In time, they started calling their training grounds the Range of 7. Not because of Phantom 7, but because Rachel had made them each find the seventh sense, the one that listens when everything else screams. The sense of knowing who you are, even when the world tells you otherwise. Months later, somewhere along the Alaskan coast, a small fishing village found a woman living near the cliffs. She fixed boats for a living, helped local kids repair old radios. Always wore gloves, said she had a tremor from an accident long ago. Never talked about the military. Never said her last name. They called her Doc because she patched things, engines, nets, even people. When storms rolled in, she'd stand by the water, staring into the mist. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind carried just right, villagers swore they heard what sounded like a rifle crack echoing faintly over the waves. No one knew where it came from. No one asked. One winter evening, a knock came on her cabin door. She opened it to find a young Marine, maybe 20, soaked, nervous, holding a letter marked confidential/hand deliver only. "Ma'am," he said, breathless, "this was sent to you from Major Keller." Rachel's eyes softened. "He's still alive, then?" "Yes, ma'am. He said you'd know what it means." She took the letter, thanked him, and sent him away with hot tea and a blanket. Then she sat by the fire and opened it. Inside was a single photo. 10 recruits, now operators, standing together in front of a banner that read Task Force Spectre. On the back, "We finished the program. You built it right, thank you." Her throat tightened. She stared at their faces, strong, confident, unbroken. The kind of faces she once seen in the mirror before everything went dark. She smiled small, proud, quiet. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Not out of pain, but release. Every tear felt like something leaving her that had stayed too long: guilt, loss, the weight of surviving. She set the photo on the mantel beside a single bullet casing, polished, golden, engraved, EXP-007. Then she whispered, "It's done, Rob, they don't need me anymore." Outside, the ocean wind howled, not as an answer but as a song. The kind you only hear when your heart is finally still. The next morning, the villagers found her boat gone. No note, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Just calm water and the faintest smell of gun oil in the air. They searched for 3 days. On the 4th, a fisherman spotted something near the horizon, a pink shimmer floating in the surf. It was a rifle case, scarred by salt and time, still sealed tight. They brought it ashore. Inside was her weapon, cleaned, polished, unloaded. And beneath it, wrapped in cloth, a small journal. The first page was her handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm where I was always meant to be, between silence and truth." Page after page followed, not of war stories but lessons. About patience, about mercy, about the weight of taking a life and the grace of saving one. It wasn't a confession. It was a manual for humanity. Her last entry read, "If they ever ask who I was, tell them I wasn't the best shot. Tell them I was the one who stopped firing first." They buried the rifle near the cliffs, overlooking the sea. No ceremony, no stone. Just waves below and wind above. The villagers said that sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick, you could see a figure standing at the edge. A woman with her hair tied back, staring toward the horizon, hands still trembling. Smiling. Years passed. The world changed again. Wars came and went. New soldiers rose. But every sniper school, every intelligence unit, every Marine range had one story that instructors told quietly at dusk, when lessons were over, when truths were easier to believe. About the woman they'd laughed at. About the pink rifle. About the shot that silenced a range and woke a nation. No one remembered her face anymore. But everyone remembered her question. If you can hit anything, what will you choose not to? It became a teaching, passed from one generation to the next. Unwritten, uncredited, unstoppable. In time, they built a small memorial at Camp Pendleton, just a slab of stone near Range 7, facing the Pacific. No rank, no birth date, no death date. Only a simple engraving. For the one who stood alone. So no one else had to. Every year, on the anniversary of the 6,000-meter shot, Marines would come to that spot. They'd place a single pink flower at the base. Not for the color, for the courage to wear it. And sometimes, on rare mornings when the fog thinned just right, you could look out past the horizon, where the water meets the sky, and swear you saw a glint. A shimmer of light, faint but real. Like sunlight flashing off a distant scope. No one ever proved it. No one needed to. Because deep down, every Marine who stood on that range knew the truth. Some ghosts never leave to haunt. They stay to guard. In another part of the world, in a classroom far from any battlefield, a young woman sat listening to a lecture on ethics in combat. She wore a small silver pendant around her neck, a casing engraved with 7. When the professor spoke about the line between heroism and violence, she raised her hand. "Sir," she asked, What if real courage isn't in the shot you take, but the one you do? The professor paused, surprised. Where did you hear that? The girl smiled softly. My mother used to say it. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling like dust on sunlight. Outside, the wind picked up, just enough to rattle the windows, as if the world itself nodded in approval. That night, across oceans and time zones, a storm rolled in over the Pacific. Lightning cracked across the waves, wild, untamed, alive. And in one flash, if you looked just right, you could almost see her. Rachel Mitchell, standing at the edge of the world, hair blowing, eyes calm, watching over the silence she'd earned. Her story wasn't written in medals or records. It was written in the hearts of those who remembered what she stood for. Truth without arrogance, courage without noise, and the simple, steady grace of a soldier who never needed applause. Because sometimes the bravest act isn't fighting, it's stopping. And the truest legacy isn't the echo of a shot. It's the quiet that follows, the silence that teaches, the dignity that doesn't speak. It simply acts.